welcome to Stingray Tom's Florida. This is a compilation of a group of short videos I made last December. It contains small and interesting objects that are in the archive. For this video, I've edited out the repetitive parts to shorten the overall length. I hope you enjoy it. Please like and subscribe. I'm creating 24 videos that look at some of the many interesting aspects of tourism in the Sunshine State. Each video will be based on a subject that's in this Florida Adventure Calendar. The archive has about 8,000 items, and while most of them are documents, there's a few objects. Some are souvenir items from attractions, while others are natural objects. Many are on display in the cabinets behind me, and 24 have been placed in this adventure calendar. In these short videos, I'll cover only a couple interesting aspects which the object represents, and not the usual detailed look at a larger subject. I will be looking at some of Florida's most famous attractions, but those deserve much more than a 20-minute video, so talking about them in these videos helps to eventually tell their whole story. The background of the adventure calendar is the 1859 Florida map by Philadelphia-based map publisher Charles de Silver. Let's see what the object for today is. This should be obvious. It's a bird feather, of course. It's pink, since it represents a native Florida bird that limits it to 3 species: the flamingo, scarlet ibis, and roseate spoonbill. Interestingly, all 3 are somewhat related to each other, and all 3 get their coloring from the same source. But I'll get that out in a moment. This feather is from the spoonbill. It's a medium-sized bird related to the ibis and is common in much of southern coastal Florida. It can be found occasionally in northern Florida, but most of the time they limit themselves from the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge and Kennedy Space Center along the Atlantic coast, south to the Everglades, and along the Gulf Coast to Tampa Bay. They're a wading bird like egrets and herons, and use mangrove islands for nesting habitat, making nests several feet above the high water mark to keep predators such as raccoons, otters, and alligators at a distance. Spoonbills prefer mostly fresh water for foraging, though they can feed in salt water as well. Unlike egrets and herons, which hunt by striking fish or other small prey with a pointed beak, they forage by sweeping their long bill back and forth in shallow water. This allows them to collect tiny crustaceans, insects, mollusks, frogs, newts, and very small fish in their bill. While it's described as being spoon-shaped, the tip of the bill ends in a rounded and flat paddle shape. While the bill is remarkably effective for the species, it wouldn't be useful for eating soup. The flat shape helps the spoonbill sift easily through mud, and the method allows the bird to find and eat food that few other birds look for. Another note about the bill. Chicks don't have a spoon-shaped bill when they hatch. After the first week, the bill starts to flatten, and after 2 weeks it begins to take on the paddle shape. About a month later, it takes on the adult bird appearance in both its bill shape and mature feathers. Spoonbills get their pink color from some of the foods they eat. Crustaceans and other aquatic invertebrates contain pigments called carotenoids that help turn the feathers pink. This is the same way that flamingos and scarlet ibis get their red or pink coloring as well. Due to their bill, the roseate spoonbill is one of the more unusual looking birds native to Florida, and is one of the most popular birds with locals and visitors alike. Let's see what the object for today is. This is a small piece of Florida's official rock. Known as agatized coral, it's a beautiful and unusual mineral that can be found in parts of North and Central Florida. I did a video on it some time ago as part of my series of Florida's official symbols. In 1979, agatized coral was chosen by the state legislature to be the Florida state rock. Florida's agatized corals are the skeletal remains of colonial animals known as anthozans that died 25 to 38 million years ago. So this is a fossil, first and foremost, of a form of ancient coral. Corals are some of the oldest surviving animals on Earth, appearing for the first time over 500 million years ago. So this particular example is much younger and lived during the Oligocene epoch, some 33 million years ago. In those 33 million years, some remarkable changes occurred, resulting in what we see today. Agatized coral is a rare type of mineralized fossil consisting of a variety of fine-grained crystalline quartz called chalcedony. You likely know what quartz crystal looks like, and it can appear in many different colors, represented here by the yellow citrine and the purple amethyst. Quartz is the second most abundant mineral in the Earth's continental crust behind feldspar and appears in many different forms. Chalcedony has a waxy luster and may be semi-transparent or translucent. It can assume a wide range of colors, the most common being white to gray, grayish blue, or shades of brown and dark yellow. Quartz is made up of silica and oxygen and makes up much of the sand on Earth, as well as human-made glass. Agate is a variety of chalcedony and is the main constituent in agatized coral. They are formed when silica from groundwater replaces ancient buried corals. They consist of fossils containing voids that become filled with chalcedony and, in some cases, quartz crystal. The process takes millions of years and results in what geologists refer to as a pseudomorph, a crystal consisting of one mineral but having the form of another, which is replaced. Agatized coral is found in 3 main Florida locations: Tampa Bay, the Econfina River, and the Withlacoochee-Suwannee River beds. Along with the agatized quartz, there's also a more unusual formation that's formed in the Withlacoochee area that's known as Druze quartz. As you can see here, Druze crystals are very tiny crystals that form on top of the chalcedony and give a sparkly appearance to the inner surface of the geode. I consider myself very lucky to have this piece, which is nearly a foot long, in the collection. Let's see what the object for today is. Today I have a magnet from the Ponce Inlet Light that's located just south of Daytona Beach. It shows the light and proclaims that I climbed to the top. While most people call these buildings lighthouses, structures like this never function as a house as well as a light. Even at the base, the circular staircase takes up the majority of the space. There are actual lighthouses, a building that includes living quarters for the keeper as well as the light, such as the Port Boca Grande Light, which today houses a museum instead of a keeper. Officially named the Ponce de Leon Inlet Light, it was built in 1887 to mark the entrance to what was then called Mosquito Inlet. In 1824, soon after the U.S. took possession of Florida, the territorial government created Mosquito County south of the St. Augustine area. It encompassed much of the rest of the peninsula and was named for the Spanish name of the area, Los Mosquitos, for the annoying and potentially deadly type of fly. By 1845, on the eve of statehood, people realized that the name Mosquito County wasn't going to encourage settlement, so it was renamed Orange County. On the other hand, Mosquito Inlet held its name until 1927, when it was changed to Ponce de Leon Inlet. The Ponce Inlet Light is the tallest in Florida at 175 feet or 53 meters. The Cape Hatteras Light in North Carolina is the only one that's taller in the U.S. at 210 feet or 64 meters. There are 203 steps to get to the top of the Ponce Light, and it's a National Historic Landmark. The Coast Guard would manage the light until 1970 when it was decommissioned. The town of Ponce Inlet accepted the light station property from the Coast Guard in 1972, and it was converted into a museum. The Keeper House and other buildings are now home to the Lighthouse Museum, with exhibits on lighthouse life, lighthouse and Fresnel lens restoration, the keepers and their families, local history, and nearby shipwrecks. The Ayres Davies Lens Exhibit building houses one of the finest collections of restored Fresnel lenses in the world, including the rotating first-order Fresnel lens from the Cape Canaveral light and the restored original Ponce Inlet first-order lens. For Fresnel lenses, first order denotes the largest and most powerful sizes, and at Ponce Inlet, it could be seen 20 miles away. While both the county and the inlet lost their original names, it lives on in the nearby Mosquito Lagoon, the estuary that's located just south of the Ponce Light. The Ponce Inlet is the main connection between the lagoon and the ocean. Both the inlet and the light are popular places to visit and explore. Let's see what the object for today is. This is an early souvenir from the Castillo de San Marcos in St. Augustine. It dates from the 1950s. Construction began on the Castillo in 1672 and it became a national monument in 1924. At the time, it was known as Fort Marion, the name the U.S. gave to it, and it was named for Francis Marion, the Revolutionary War general, better known as the Swamp Fox. In 1942, the National Park Service gave its Spanish name back. This souvenir is labeled Castle San Marcos, while later ones have transitioned to Castillo. The stack of cannonballs is made out of some type of pot metal and is covered in copper. I believe it was plated, since when I found it many years ago, it was quite black, honestly the color of actual cannonballs. But the label wasn't visible, so I cleaned it up with a metal polish. I like the shiny color and the label looks really nice. There are currently 38 cannons on display at the Castillo. They're a collection of various sizes and types and are mostly Spanish in origin. They date between 1690 and 1846 and fired shot between 2 and 32 pounds in weight. Much of the time, cannon were described by the weight of the cannonballs, so a 12-pounder or a 24-pounder. By the way, even though a 24-pound ball is twice the weight of a 12-pound, because of the weight of the iron, the respective diameters were 4.5 inches to 5.5, not a lot of change. The Castillo was prepared to fire upon ships in the Matanzas River, with the larger cannons having a 1-mile range, giving the Castillo control of each of the water approaches to the city. The fort has examples of the 3 types of cannons: guns, howitzers, and mortars. These 3 types basically have to do with the parabolic curve the shot took between the cannon and the target. Guns would batter ship at long range and low elevation, essentially firing directly towards the side of a ship. Mortars lobbed shells at great elevation, which would have the shot land on the deck of a ship. Howitzers were developed to fill the mid-range needs between guns and mortars. The Castillo has another item directly connected with the cannonballs, the hot shot furnace, used to heat cannonballs. Also known as heated shot, hot shot were cannonballs that were heated so they'd start fires when they struck a wooden ship. The furnace was a freestanding oven that would quickly heat many balls on racks. In some ovens, cold cannonballs were placed in the furnace and allowed to roll down inclined rails in rows. The first shot stopped over the firebox at the low end and was heated to about 1500 degrees. At that temperature, they'd glow red. Pulling out the lowest ball would allow the next ball to roll down and take its place. 3 men were required to manage a furnace. 1 tended the fire and added balls. 1 removed the heated balls, and 1 used a rasp to clean the surface. I've talked about different aspects of the Castillo de San Marcos in a few other videos, including this one. Let's see what the object for today is. This small purple object is a model of the night bus. It's a die-cast metal item purchased at Universal Studios in the Diagonal area of the park. The night bus is a triple-decker bus that's part of the fictional Harry Potter universe. It provides transportation for wizards around Great Britain. Riders hail it by holding out their wand hand, regardless of the location or the time of day. The night bus is faster than actual British buses since it will pick riders up where they want and likewise drop them off without the need to follow an established route. It travels quickly on British roads, and like most magical items, it's entirely invisible to non-wizards, known as muggles. Obstructions move out of its way, including other vehicles and buildings. The night bus can also leap 100 miles for longer trips. While it's not explained, there are signs on the bus that say it can't go underwater. During the day, the night bus is outfitted with the seats most buses have, but at night, it's outfitted with beds. Because of the erratic motion of the bus as it shoots rapidly around the country, one wonders how restful it is. Some passengers, including Harry and Ron, considered riding it to be an uncomfortable experience. Like other forms of mass transportation, it costs to ride it, and additional services like hot water bottles, toothbrushes, and hot chocolate could be purchased as well. As used in the Harry Potter movies, the night bus was built by attaching the top deck of a London AEC Regent 3 RT bus onto the top of another one. Both were operated by London Transport in the UK and were part of the 4,824 that were built between 1939 and 1954. The one at Diagon Alley is yet another creation similar to that made for the movie. When the Universal guests leave the night bus area and find their way into Diagon Alley, they discover a bustling and noisy world filled with hopeful wizards. It's nearly always crowded, which befits the Diagon Alley of the books and movies. So I wanted to show you what it looks like without all the muggles wandering around. It's a remarkable, immersive world, and while it's empty, there's always someone keeping an eye on the place. By the way, that was a Ukrainian iron-bellied dragon. Let's see what the object is for today. Well, it's small, sharp, and toothed. It's white and about 3 inches long. I'm pretty sure it's a stingray barb, or my name isn't Stingray Tom. As you probably know, this is from a stingray. Rays and their cousins, sharks, are in a class of fish called chondrichthyes, which means fish with cartilage, that have skeletons composed of cartilage, the same material that makes up the structure in your ears and nose. It's a resilient and smooth type of connective tissue, semi-transparent and non-porous, and is usually covered by a tough membrane. Rays and sharks don't have solid bones like most fish, and all birds, reptiles, and mammals. But they do have hard structures that are made out of modified fish scales known as placoid scales. They're similar in composition to teeth, with a blood-supplied pulp cavity and an exterior layer of dentine. And unlike cartilage, the scales don't break down much over time. The barb and the teeth of rays are made up of these scales. There's about 220 stingray species in the world, and most are commonly found in coastal, tropical, and subtropical marine waters throughout the world. Stingrays are only part of the entire ray family, most of which don't have stingers or venomous barbs. For example, if you live in the deep ocean, having a defensive weapon at the base of your spine isn't very useful. So not all rays are stingrays, but oddly enough, not all stingrays are called stingrays. Regardless, stingrays are very common in Florida waters, especially two species, the southern stingray and the cownose ray. Those are the main types that Florida aquariums have in their stingray touch pools. Southern stingrays are a type of whip ray, so named because of the long whip-like tail. Cownose and southern stingrays are from different families, but they have similar barbs. The barb on both is serrated, covered in a venomous mucus, and is used for self-defense. The venom is composed of venomous secretions and mucus. The spine is covered with a layer of skin, and during secretion, the venom penetrates the skin and mixes with the mucus to release the venom on its victim. Stingrays store the venom within tissue cells before its release. Since stingrays are small and eat mollusks and small fish, they're not aggressive and ordinarily attack humans only when provoked, such as when they're stepped on. They can have up to 3 barbs, and contact with them will cause localized pain, swelling, muscle cramps, and tissue breakdown. While the injury is very painful, it's very unlikely to be fatal. Surgery may be required to remove the part of the barb that sometimes breaks off in the wound. As for the death of Steve Irwin in 2006, he had grabbed the stingray, holding it to his chest. This allowed the barb to penetrate his chest and pierce his heart, causing massive trauma and bleeding. It appears that it was partly the venom, partly the wound, and partly the distance from medical treatment that caused his death. Let's see what the object for today is. It's a pin from Kennedy Space Center, representing the Heroes and Legends exhibit at the Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex. I've been a huge fan of KSC and the various space programs for many years. It's been remarkable to witness how the Visitors Complex has grown over many decades, and I consider myself lucky to have met several astronauts through the years. I also had a wonderful conversation with former KSC director James Kennedy as I toured the Apollo Saturn V Center a number of years back. Heroes and Legends is one of the newer exhibits at KSC. Opening in 2016, it focuses on America's first astronauts and 9 characteristics of a hero. Each characteristic features astronaut artifacts and multimedia relevant to that characteristic. The exhibit's unique displays include the 1966 Gemini capsule flown by Thomas Stafford and Eugene Cernan, the original NASA emblem from the Mercury Control Center, the Mercury Control Center itself, a Mercury Redstone rocket, and Wally Schirr's 1962 Sigma 7 capsule. Falcon's Creative Group, located in Orlando, is the firm that developed the concept design for Heroes and Legends, including sleek architecture and a sweeping ramp that simulate the journey to the stars, with a slingshot maneuver through the adjacent rocket garden. Guests encounter a stunning 360-degree discovery bay where they learn how society defines heroism. The building also includes the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame, founded in the 80s by the Mercury 7 astronauts who conceived of establishing a place where U.S. space travelers could be remembered. It first opened to visitors near Kennedy Space Center in 1990, operating along with the U.S. Space Camp. It eventually became part of KSC itself and was included in the Heroes and Legends exhibit. The Hall of Fame honors American astronauts and features the world's largest collection of their personal memorabilia. Inductees are selected by a committee of former NASA officials and flight controllers, historians, journalists, and former astronauts. The philosophy regarding the first three groups of inductees was that all astronauts who flew in NASA's pioneering programs would be included because of their participation in an early spaceflight. This included projects Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Skylab, and Apollo-Soyuz. There are 107 inductees as of 2023. In the center of the Hall of Fame, there is an interactive kiosk with an inductee database and a mission index. Let's see what the object for today is. Well, today we have a 1985 bumper sticker. You know, for when we used to have car bumpers. It's from Cypress Gardens, the most popular Florida attraction in the 1950s and 60s. The Cypress Gardens story began in 1931 with Dick and Julie Pope buying land on Lake Eloise in Winter Haven. Between 31 and 36, a marsh area was drained, canals were cleared and dug, walkways were poured, and lawns and gardens were planted. The gardens opened in 36 with the Popes continuing to develop the property through the years. Now a National Historic District, the gardens incorporated the shorelines of Lakes Eloise and Summit and many native oaks and bald cypress trees. There were sculptures and a constructed waterfall and an extensive collection of plants from around the world. In 1940, freezing weather damaged flame vines at the garden's entrance. Julie Pope dressed a staff member in an antebellum dress and placed her at the entrance to hide the vines. This was the birth of Cypress Gardens' iconic Southern Belles, young women dressed in wide, hoop-skirted dresses who were stationed throughout the park to greet visitors. While the notion of a pre-Civil War style dress isn't a great concept today, the Southern Belles were simply another attraction in the gardens. Amateur photographers flocked to Winter Haven to take photos of the local young ladies in beautiful outfits that posed in the dramatic landscape. World War II began the next year, with Dick joining the Army Signal Corps and Julie managing the gardens. In 1941, a newspaper ran a photo of the gardens with the Pope's children water skiing in the background. Afterwards, local servicemen arrived at the garden and asked about the water ski show. Julie realized the opportunity and told them it would happen after noon. She then called her kids' school and told them that they and their friends were going to be a new park attraction. That began what evolved into the world-famous Cypress Gardens ski show. After the war, Dick and Julie's tireless promotion of what was becoming the most successful attraction in the state would see Hollywood come to visit and film several movies, including Easy to Love. Filmed in 1953, it featured spectacular scenes of water ballet, diving, and of course water skiing. This behind-the-scenes clip shows Dick Pope on the left with the exceptional choreographer and director Busby Berkeley on the shore of Lake Eloise. The movie, starring Esther Williams, Van Johnson, Sid Charisse, and Tony Martin, was so important that a special swimming pool in the shape of the Sunshine State was built and which jutted out into the lake. Known as the Florida Pool, it quickly became one of the primary postcard images for Cypress Gardens, with the popes even floating thousands of oranges in it. In this scene from Easy to Love, Esther Williams skis past a pool which is ringed by 76 bathing beauties in alternating red and white suits. Note the cypress trees along the shore, showing how many natural Florida lakes appear. Here's a couple more short clips, including the talented Esther Williams and the crowds watching the water skiing. There's so much more to share about Cypress Gardens, but it'll have to wait for another video or 5. As you may know, Cypress Gardens closed in 2009 but reopened as Legoland Florida 2 years later. Happily, the original botanical gardens were protected as part of a National Historic District, so Legoland has kept them open for visitors. They still offer water ski shows, though today the performers look like Lego figures. Let's see what the object for today is. This is a lanyard from the official skunk ape research headquarters in Ochopee, in the Big Cypress Swamp. The skunk ape headquarters describes itself as where you can get skunk ape memorabilia along with blowguns, knives, and alligator heads. The HQ also features a reptile and bird exhibit of huge gators, constrictors, and a variety of exotic birds. If you've never heard of Ochopee, these days it's little more than a wide spot on the Tamiami Trail, though apart from the skunk ape, it's known for having the country's smallest post office. If you're unfamiliar with the skunk ape, think of it as Florida's version of Bigfoot. It's typically described as a large human-like creature. Since occasional sightings seem to be the only evidence, it's unclear as to its size, but witnesses describe it as being 6 to 9 feet tall, long arms, walking upright, and being very shy. To start with, I'll show a clip of a video that was shot in 2000 by Dave Sheely, the owner of the Skunk Ape Research Headquarters. It's not clear who first named the skunk ape, but it appears to have been in the 60s. It's named for its bad odor, often described as being similar to a skunk. Presumably, its odor is noticeable from quite a distance since no one has described getting close to one. It has been most often sighted in the Everglades and Big Cypress Swamp, areas that are about as remote as Florida gets. It's covered in reddish mottled fur, but little more is known about the elusive creature. It's been suggested that the Seminole and Miccosukee cultures include stories of a smelly, strong, and shy creature, though the comments haven't been verified. Dave Sheely is the most visible proponent of the skunk ape's existence and probably the person who is connected with the creature the most. He believes that the ape finds lima beans tasty, so he's used them to attract it. Unfortunately, it's difficult to believe that the swamp ape exists because of a lack of empirical data. For example, the area that is thought to be the ape's range has dozens of motion-activated trail cameras that are there to study other animals, such as the Florida panther. In fact, the panther is an example of what we know about a fairly large, reclusive, and quite rare animal. There's less than 250 of them in the wild, roughly living in the same area as the swamp ape is supposed to inhabit. Because it's critically endangered, it's intensively studied, so there are certainly more people looking for them than are looking for the ape. Obviously, that's part of the argument as to why there's less evidence for the ape, but we see regular evidence of the panther in many other ways. They do appear in trail cameras. They are clearly photographed by average people. We see their scat, and we find their bodies when they die. Sadly, traffic collisions are responsible for most of the recorded panther deaths each year between 2014 and 2021. By the way, I've covered the Florida panther in this video. On the other hand, the skunk ape hasn't shown itself in any of those ways, with the exception of some footprints and a few questionable photographs, such as these that were ultimately identified to be an escaped orangutan. There's also no examples in the fossil record. Indeed, there's no fossil evidence of large apes at any time in North America's past. Still, none of that means people shouldn't visit the skunk ape research headquarters in Ochopee, along with the nation's smallest post office. Both are interesting and worth a stop if you're heading along the Tamiami Trail or are heading south to Everglades City and Everglades National Park. Let's see what the object for today is. We have a chunk of moonstone. Ooh, you say, you've got a rock from the moon? No, sadly, I don't have any of the 842 pounds of lunar rock brought back in the 6 Apollo missions that explored the moon. There's also about 2,400 pounds of lunar meteorites which have been discovered around the Earth, but all of that is for institutions and the wealthy. This is actually moonstone, a very terrestrial mineral. Composed of sodium, potassium, aluminum, and silica, it's a feldspar that appears pearly and opalescent. The name comes from the stone's appearance, which has a milky bluish interior light. The effect is caused by light diffraction through alternating layers of translucent stone. The diffracted light varies from white to various shades of pastel, including blue, green, and yellow. Native moonstone can be found in Armenia, Australia, Austria, Mexico, Madagascar, Myanmar, Norway, Poland, India, Sri Lanka, and parts of the U.S. including New Mexico, Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia. Notice that Florida isn't on that list, so why am I talking about it here? Well, oddly enough, the state legislature designated moonstone as the official state gemstone in 1970. Note the year. Putting it all together, you have Florida, 1970, and moonstone. You've probably guessed that it was chosen the state gemstone for one simple reason. The historic first moon landing in 1969 took off from Kennedy Space Center, making it a Florida-related event with 350 million people around the world watching the launch, with about 1 million on hand in the Titusville area to watch the remarkable sight in person. It was one of the largest audiences of any launch at the Space Center. There is an interesting connection between moonstone and the moon. Around 80% of the lunar surface is composed of an igneous rock named anorthosite, which is almost entirely made of feldspar. That's the same basic type of rock as moonstone, though there are two different forms of feldspar shown here. By the way, NASA still holds nearly all the moon rocks brought back by the astronauts. Much of it's held in the Lunar Samples Vault, located at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, though there is one sample on display at Kennedy Space Center. For more info on the moonstone, check out this video. Let's see what the object for today is. So this is a replica tombstone from the Haunted Mansion attraction at Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom. The Haunted Mansion is one of the best known and most popular rides in the world. Even though it still uses mostly 1960s technology, it continues to be popular with visitors of every age. It was one of the final attractions that Walt Disney worked on before his death in 1966 and is a remarkable example of two of Walt Disney's most important design goals: a nearly fanatical attention to detail, and an interesting desire to use his staff in all aspects of the design. This replica tombstone, along with the two others in the set, represent both of these goals. While the ride inside the mansion is filled with wonderful experiences, the outside has memorable scenes as well. The grounds have two graveyards. The first is the pet cemetery located on the right of the mansion. That's best seen as people exit the attraction, while the other is at the end of the queue in front of the entrance. The fact that there's a graveyard here at all speaks to Disney's attention to detail. Guests know that this is a haunted house, but on the outside it's presented as normal. From a distance, there's only small details to suggest there's something odd, such as the bat vein. But as people are about to enter, they experience the graveyard. It's something that no other house has in its front yard. This is the final step, literally and figuratively, and it informs the guests that the house is far from normal and provides a subtle warning about entering. These details work whether you know about the attraction or not. It builds anticipation as well as any movie could. The tombstones memorialize a Leota, Fred, and a Master Gracie. All are not only Disney staff, each has been honored as Disney legends. Fans of the Haunted Mansion will know Leota Toombs, as she also appears twice in the attraction. She was the model for Madame Leota, the floating fortune teller head in the seance room. It's Leota who summons the spirits in the mansion. Then, when the guests leave their doom buggies, there's a small ghost known as Little Leota who encourages them to hurry back. In 1940, Leota began working at Disney in the ink and paint department. She later became one of the company's first female Imagineers and helped develop such attractions as It's a Small World, Pirates of the Caribbean, the Enchanted Tiki Room, and the Country Bear Jamboree. Master Gracie is also represented inside the mansion, though in a roundabout way. Disney cast members came to identify the Gracie tombstone with a portrait found in the foyer of the Haunted Mansion, which transforms from a young man into a skeleton. However, the image is an homage to Oscar Wilde's 1890 novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, said artist Mark Davis. The misinterpretation evolved so that Gracie also became associated with the ghost host, the narrator of the ride. This story was eventually adopted by the Disney Company and basically became an official part of the Haunted Mansion. In reality, Master Gracie honors Yale Gracie, a writer and artist on many movies including Pinocchio, The Three Caballeros, and Fantasia. Hired by Disney in 1939, in the 1960s he had become an Imagineer, designing many of the special effects for Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion. By the way, his tombstone has a rose placed on it every morning. Fred represents Fred Yorger, one of Disney's original Imagineers. In 1953, he was recruited from Warner Brothers by Walt Disney himself. He'd create models for most of Disneyland's original attractions, including the Steamboat Mark Twain, Main Street, Matterhorn, Sleeping Beauty Castle, and of course the Haunted Mansion. He also designed models of the submarine Nautilus for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and was responsible for creating rock work at Disney World, including in the Jungle Cruise, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, and the Atrium Waterfall at the Polynesian Resort. While the real Fred never had a rock fall on his head, his epitaph certainly makes sense. Let's see what the object for today is. This is a pretty good sized shark tooth. It's actually an ancient fossilized one that came from a megalodon. For a shark's tooth, it's very large at 3 inches long and 2.5 inches wide. For perspective, that's equal to the size of the teeth of the largest great white shark known. On the other hand, it's nowhere near the largest megalodon tooth ever found, at 7.5 inches long. with the scientific name Otodus megalodon, which means big tooth. It's a highly popular ancient animal that has become a media darling in the past 20 years or so. But oddly enough, very little is actually known about the animal. While science has studied many of the living species of sharks around the world, it's very difficult to study long extinct sharks for one primary reason. Sharks have skeletons of cartilage, not bone, and it breaks down quickly after death, so there are no ancient shark skeleton fossils. What we have are megalodon teeth along with coprolites, fossilized poop, as well as a few vertebrae or backbones. Through these, scientists have been able to surmise that megalodon is likely related to the mako shark rather than the great white as was previously thought. They lived between 3 and 23 million years ago in the Miocene and Pliocene epochs. It's regarded as one of the largest and most powerful predators to have ever lived, though its appearance and maximum size are unknown. It's speculated that it might be a thicker version of either the great white shark, the basking shark, or the sand tiger shark. If megalodon had a body type similar to a great white, it's thought that it would have a maximum length estimate of up to 67 feet or 20 meters. Here's a graphic comparing the maximum size of the megalodon, great white, whale shark, the largest living shark, and the blue whale, the largest animal that has ever lived. Megalodon could also weigh over 100 tons. By the way, the largest megalodon were very likely female, though the only way we can surmise that is that the largest living species of sharks typically have females that are significantly larger than their male counterparts. Megalodon, like other sharks, made use of nursery areas to birth their young, specifically warm water coastal environments with large amounts of food and protection from predators. The Bone Valley area in western Polk County was one such location, which is why megalodon teeth are relatively common in central and west Florida. Let's see what the object for today is. Well, it's a packet of sugar. Possibly an odd thing to find in an advent calendar since it appears so insignificant, but there's a huge Florida connection to this packet, and in reality, sugar is a massively valuable resource. In 2020, sugarcane made nearly $700 million in the state, the most valuable single crop, though the U.S. Department of Agriculture lumps all varieties of flowers and decorative plants together and all citrus varieties together to make floriculture and citrus more valuable than sugarcane. Florida's first commercial sugarcane plantations were established in New Smyrna in the late 1760s. Today, the state produces 52% of the sugarcane in the U.S. As important as the crop is, it's grown in a relatively small area, encompassing parts of Palm Beach, Hendry, Glades, and Martin County, the 4 counties that ring the southern part of Lake Okeechobee. That land was once part of the Everglades and Lake Okeechobee before the huge dike was constructed around the lake. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services reports that American adults consume about 17 teaspoons of added sugar every day. That's about 60 pounds of sugar each year, or nearly 6,000 of these little packets. Obviously, sugar is a significant part of most Americans' lives, but it's actually a new phenomenon. As recently as 1900, sugar was expensive and used fairly sparingly in the home. America's prosperity boom after World War II included the rise of sugar as a common ingredient in ready-made items available in grocery stores. And at the same time, Florida's sugar industry shifted into high gear with both production and promotion. It might be hard to believe it today, but in the 50s and 60s, factory tours were popular tourist attractions, as these 2 brochures from Belle Glade and Clewiston attest. You could tour the immense sugar mills that were constantly belching black smoke, take tours of the cane fields, and watch the burning of cane that was done just before harvest. Belgrade was, and still is, known as the sugarcane capital of the world, while Clewiston remains America's sweetest town. While there aren't crowds of tourists lining up to take sugarcane production tours these days, there are occasionally ones offered. I know that as recently as 2018, there was a bus tour in Clewiston that included seeing the town and small sugar museum, visiting the cane fields, and heading to the sugar mill, only for a description of what's happening on the inside as you sit on the bus. If you're interested in something like that, contact the Clewiston Chamber of Commerce. For more information about sugar production, especially how it was done 150 years ago in Florida, check out this video. Let's see what the object for today is. This is a magnet from the Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing, located south of Ocala, right off of I-75. In drag racing, the most explosive of motorsports, Don Garlits is one of the most successful racers of all time. His influence is such that he actually has two nicknames, Big Daddy and Swamp Rat. First racing in 1954, he's one of the pioneers of the sport. He began with a hand-built car made up of old parts in his hometown of Tampa. Yet Garlits won the first National Hot Rod Association race he entered. In its infancy, drag racing was largely populated by drivers from California. So as a Floridian, Garlits was an anachronism, especially for being so good. He'd become Swamp Rat just because he was from Florida. He broke drag racing speed records many times, with Swamp Rat number 30 being the first car that reached 270 miles per hour, covering a quarter mile in 5.4 seconds during the 1986 Gator Nationals in Gainesville.
Defeating Shirley Muldowney was an accomplishment in itself. Now he is racing against the crowd favorite as Herb Parks makes sure that canopy is closed tightly over Big Daddy Don Garlits. He approaches the starting line. Garlits has the whole shot. Pastorini is right alongside of him. Garlits through the finish line and moves into the finals. And Don Garlits sets 272 miles an hour as the fastest speed ever on a drag strip. The crowd goes crazy. In addition, Garlits runs a 5.40 second elapsed time, the quickest time of the entire meet. Let's watch again. Garlits is in the near lane. This streamlined device accelerates down the quarter mile and easily outdistancing Dan Pastorini, who ran 5.49 seconds, losing to Garlits, who became the first driver ever over 270 miles an hour. As the fans say, Big Daddy rules.
That Swamp Rat was put in the Smithsonian the next year, with Big Daddy firing up one last time outside the doors. Garlits would later say, "People ask me what was the greatest moment in all my experiences. That's like picking a favorite child. Every win and every experience was very special to me. But if I had to pick one, it'd have to be when my record-breaking Swamp Rat was enshrined in the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History near Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis and NASA's first manned space capsule. There were no checkered flags or trophies, but it'd be tough for me to imagine another racing moment better." Big Daddy was already familiar with museums, having opened his own in 1976. Not only does it feature Garlits' own cars, trophies, and other memorabilia, it has cars of other greats, including Don the Snake Prudhomme, Connie Coletta, Sneaky Pete Robinson, and my favorite, Shirley Muldowney. It's divided up into one building housing the race cars and another holding regular cars. The collection contains about 300 vehicles, most of which are one of a kind. Big Daddy lives on the property and hangs out in the museum occasionally. He's therefore quite approachable. He finished his career winning 144 national events and collected 10 AHRA championships, 4 IRHA championships, and 3 NHRA championships. His high-speed racing attitude could be summed up in the following quote: "Alcohol is for drinking, gas is for cleaning parts, and nitro is for racing." Let's see what the object for today is. We have a small and rather beautiful seashell. This is one you'd be thrilled with if you picked it up on Captiva Island Beach. I call this a small shell because it's a long way from being fully grown. This is a horse conch. And yes, conch is the proper Floridian pronunciation of the word spelled C-O-N-C-H. It's the largest gastropod in Florida waters and the second largest in the world. They can reach about 2 foot in length. This is one I have, and it's a foot long. The horse conch is common in shallow waters from North Carolina to the Yucatan Peninsula. It has a pointed shell that's thick and sturdy and provides the home of its large orange foot. The conch can retract its foot entirely into the shell and close it with the operculum, the trap door that protects the animal. In larger specimens, it can look as if the huge orange mass wouldn't fit in the shell. Its shell color is mostly orange in young individuals, while it becomes grayish-white to salmon orange when an adult. While the horse conch looks similar to the queen conch, they're only distantly related gastropods. The name conch used for both of them is more of a generic term than one suggesting a relationship. It's been used in English for many centuries and can be found in Latin, Ancient Greek, and even Sanskrit. And it means shellfish in each of those languages. The horse conch is a predator. In fact, the horse conch often preys on other large gastropod predators, including the lightning whelk, tulip snail, and the aforementioned queen conch. It captures and smothers its prey with its powerful foot. Of course, while it's a large mollusk, it's also preyed on by other large predators, including sea stars, octopus, and they appear to be popular with tiger sharks. Among pre-Columbian cultures around the Gulf Coast, including those in Florida, the horse conch was a valuable commodity. Not only was it a popular and common food source, its shell was very useful. Ancient Mayan art shows that the whorl of the shell was used as a drinking cup or held ink and paint for royal scribes. The shell was commonly attached to a wooden handle and used as a hammer. The central column was removed for making pendants, chisels, and scrapers, while portions of the outer shell could be used to make dippers, spoons, and bowls. The whole shell was used as a horn. The horse conch is Florida's official state shell, and I covered it in this video a while back. Let's see what the object for today is. What we have is a brass coin that's about the size of a quarter, and it's from the Buffalo Trading Company, once located in downtown Orlando, in a complex of historic buildings that was named after the railroad station, which was also part of that complex. Created in 1973, Church Street Station was an entertainment complex located on both sides of Church Street. Opening just after Walt Disney World with restaurants, shops, bars, and concerts, it quickly became the main nighttime destination for Disney vacationers. It'd only be supplanted when Disney World opened its own nighttime complex in 1989, known as Pleasure Island. Church Street was made up of 8 structures built between 1886 and 1924. The Buffalo Trading Company was a Western wear and souvenir store and featured a large American bison just inside the entrance. Its building was known as the Bumby Hardware. Built in 1886, it was one of the first non-wooden buildings in Central Florida. It was built by Joseph Bumby, who moved his family from England to Orlando in 1873. Upon arrival, he became a citrus grower, feed store owner, and Orlando's first railroad agent in 1880. His hardware store was the largest store in Orlando where people could buy just about anything. Their slogan was, "If you can't find it, go to Bumby's." Joseph died in 1911, but his family operated the store until 1966. Only a few years later, the Buffalo Trading Company would open as part of Church Street. Across the railroad tracks is the Orlando Railroad Depot. While today it's known as Church Street Station, it wasn't called that until the entertainment complex opened. Completed in 1889, it was built by Henry Plant, known for connecting the Tampa Bay area and southwest Florida to the nation's railroad system, spurring the area's development. It's of the Queen Anne Victorian style and is on the National Register of Historic Places, and as a part of Church Street, it held several shops. Church Street's other buildings are the Bumby Annex, Joseph Bumby's addition to his store. For Church Street, it held a store and an ice cream parlor. Next was the Purcell Building, selling horse tack. It'd become the Cheyenne Saloon and Opera House. Across the street was the Orlando Hotel. This is where Rosie O'Grady's Good Time Emporium was located. To the east is the Leon Jewelry Store. Apple Annie's Courtyard, another Church Street bar, was here. Next is the Strand Hotel. It became Lily Marlene's Aviator's Pub and Restaurant. The final one is the Teal Building. It was a bar and grill in the 1920s, and when renovated, it was Phineas Fogg's Balloon Works. Church Street also had its own train. Known as Old Duke, it was built in 1912 at the Baldwin Steam Engine and Iron Works in Baldwin, Ohio, for the St. Louis and San Francisco Railroad. It operated as a switcher in Pensacola, the southernmost extension of the St. Louis-San Francisco. From there, it was purchased by Church Street, and the rail cars were used as its administrative offices. After Church Street Station closed its doors, the engine and cars were moved to the Florida Railroad Museum in 2012. By the way, throughout the 70s and 80s, Church Street was the fourth busiest attraction in Florida after Disney, SeaWorld, and Busch Gardens. Let's see what the object for today is. This is a pretty cool magnet of the Citrus Tower, which is located in Claremont. The Citrus Tower is one of 3 towers located on Florida's spine, the Lake Wales Ridge. The Citrus Tower is at the northern end, as well as only 5 miles southwest of the peninsula's highest point. That's Sugarloaf Mountain, and it's 312 feet above sea level. You can learn more about it in this video. The Citrus Tower is 228 feet above sea level at its base and rises another 226 feet. That's a total of 454 feet or 138 meters. Built in 1956, it was once the most popular tourist attraction in the Orlando area. As you can guess, the tower was designed to showcase Lake County's thousands of acres of citrus trees along with its rolling hills and beautiful lakes. Located directly on U.S. Route 27, every day thousands of tourists would find it hard not to stop at the tower on their way to and from South Florida. The original plans were reportedly for a tower only 60 feet high. Over the next few years, the height grew until it was finally tall enough to be seen for miles around. Unlike most of the contemporary attractions in Florida, the Citrus Tower was expensive from day one. There's no way to start small when the attraction is an observation tower. Because of this, Al Thacker, the owner of the land and a nearby motel, was joined by members of the local Chamber of Commerce in founding the Florida Tower Corporation. That was eventually allowed to sell stock in the venture. Thacker, who was originally from Pittsburgh, even twisted the arms of people in that city to contribute to the project. When the tower was completed in 1956, some 300 stockholders in 22 states provided the $250,000 it cost. That's nearly $3 million in 2023. The Citrus Tower would be one of the most popular attractions in the state for at least a decade, but the Florida Turnpike, which passes only 3 miles to the east, siphoned the lion's share of vacationers who were headed to Miami. US 27 dried up as a main artery into South Florida. And while places like Silver Springs and Cypress Gardens remained popular, the Citrus Tower didn't lure many of the drivers who were rushing by and couldn't even see the landmark from the turnpike. Then in the 80s, the unthinkable happened. A series of freezing nights over several winters combined with the arrival of the Mediterranean fruit fly to hurt the northern reaches of the citrus industry. This included Lake County. Then, a devastating bacterium was discovered in the state, one that caused a disease called citrus canker. While the disease didn't actually hurt trees directly, it caused lesions on the fruit, rendering it unsaleable. Since it was highly infectious, thousands of acres of citrus were destroyed. Around the Citrus Tower, this meant one thing: no more citrus groves. Tower visitors looked out on bare fields instead of trees, at least until the land was sold to developers and the town evolved from a citrus center to one of Orlando's bedroom communities. Claremont's population grew from a placid 7,000 in 1990 to 43,000 in 2020, a six-fold increase. One of the nice results from the growth would be a new owner of the Citrus Tower realizing that it didn't need to be a tourist attraction to make profit. And so today, the tower is popular with locals, with a coffee bar on the ground floor with tasty drinks you can take all the way up to the refurbished observation deck. Drinks include their signature orange cream latte and orange butter cream. Check it out next time you're passing by. Let's see what the object for today is. This is a fossil of a manatee vertebra, one of its backbones, that was found here in Florida. The fossil dates from the Neogene period and is between 2 and 15 million years old. True manatees evolved about 15 million years ago, though early forms evolved over 50 million years in the past. Prior to that, their relatives lived on land and are related to elephants. I did this more in-depth video on the manatee a while back. It's a fascinating animal. Think about it. Along with its 3 sister species, it's the only fully aquatic mammal that's an herbivore. There's about 90 species of whales and dolphins, all of which are either predators or which hunt the seas for blooms of plankton. Manatees have been an integral part of the waters in and around Florida for millions of years, but they're only one of the many animals that called Florida home long before Ponce de Leon named the peninsula. Just like this vertebra, many of the ancient species left their mark in the paleontological record. There's no dinosaurs hidden in the bedrock of Florida, but the state's geology is rich with fossils that go back 33 million years. The Florida Museum of Natural History in Gainesville has a remarkable collection and a striking display of dozens of specimens from the state's past, and many local museums also have interesting collections of fossils that were collected nearby. This includes the Mulberry Phosphate Museum in Mulberry, in the heart of the Bone Valley Formation. Yes, there's a Bone Valley Formation. That's just how rich Florida is when it comes to fossils. Bone Valley is a geologic area located mostly in northwestern Polk County and parts of adjacent counties. It consists of a sandy soil made up of phosphate, quartz, and fragments of bone. Bone Valley holds one of the richest deposits of phosphate in the world, so it's been heavily mined, which has resulted in massive changes to the land, but it has also led to the discovery of hundreds of fossils of animals which both appear familiar and strange to us, such as the mastodon and its longer-legged cousin, the mammoth. Both could weigh up to 24,000 pounds, though ones in Florida tended to be smaller. There were giant ground sloths, or megatherium, which could weigh 10,000 pounds, highlighting why they were ground sloths. Plus large-headed llamas. In fact, while there are no llamas or the related camels native to North America today, the camel family is known to have originated on the continent. Also, Pampitherae, related to armadillos but weighed some 400 pounds. And terror birds. Yes, that's the common name for the now extinct carnivorous flightless birds, including Florida's native Titanus, one of the largest of the terror birds, standing nearly 7 feet tall with one of the heaviest skulls of any bird. Titanus would likely have preyed on Pampithera. And finally, Proceratid, a deer-like herbivore that's actually more closely related to giraffes and cattle. A few million years ago, manatees would have been familiar with each of these remarkable animals as they drank at the edge of the rivers in which the manatees swam. And today, much of what we know of these species, all of which are long extinct except for the manatee of course, is from the work of Florida scientists who have found and studied their fossils. Let's see what the object for today is. It's surprising just how large some of the items in the adventure calendar are. This is a cypress knee that was originally from the Cypress Knee Museum, once located in Palmdale. Now, as a friend said to me many years ago, I didn't even know the trees had knees. Well, at least one type of tree has them, and while they're called knees, the knee is not as we know it. Anyone who has spent time around Florida's lakes and rivers has likely noticed strange objects that emerge out of the ground or water and are typically covered in bark. These knees grow out of the roots of the two cypress tree species native to Florida, pond cypress and bald cypress. Since they're such an unusual feature, there's been some 200 years of scientific speculation as to their function. There are currently 5 main hypotheses. Aeration. Knees might be a form of pneumatophore, or breathing root, because roots need a source of air to carry out cellular respiration. However, it's difficult to reconcile this since knees are generally missing in trees growing in deeper water, while they're regularly found on trees growing in wet soil or in shallow water. Plus, a study that measured the amount of oxygen consumed in knees showed that the rate of oxygen consumption was actually lower than for other plants. Mechanical support. Larger cypress trees flare out at their base, which provides better stability in wet soil, and it's thought that the knees are another aspect of buttressing, strengthening the roots to better anchor the tall trees during hurricanes. Once again, the absence of knees on trees growing in deeper water casts doubt on this, since they are likely to also need support. Methane emission. One study showed that knees may assist in methane emissions. Commonly known as swamp gas, wetlands produce a large amount, and while methane is not toxic to plants, it's thought that they could have evolved to assist in its release. Tests have shown, however, that knees account for less than 1% of the methane emissions in swamps. Nutrient acquisition. It's thought that knees might act as drift catchers that collect nutrients from the water, but there's no direct evidence of this. Carbohydrate storage. It's been reported that knees contain organelles that hold starch for the tree, though even if that's accurate, it's unknown as to why they need extra storage when growing under wet conditions, but not dry. So today, the function of knees remains unclear, which suggests 2 other hypotheses. That knees evolved in response to past environmental needs that no longer exist, or they never served any purpose whatsoever. Getting back to the object at hand, the Cypress Knee Museum was owned by Tom Gaskins, an entrepreneur and inventor. Opened between 1951 and 2000, it was a small attraction in rural Glades County that promoted Florida nature and presented harvested cypress knees as interesting artistic objects. I plan to do a video on Tom Gaskins and his museum in 2024. The cypress knees on display and for sale were collected as local swamps were being drained for farmland and the cypress trees were harvested for their wood. The knees were basically waste products, but Gaskins felt that after removing the bark and oiling them, they would be beautiful items. And of course they are. I have about 20 of them in the archive. Some bought at the museum and others collected elsewhere. All are unique and all have Tom Gaskins' name on the bottom. Let's see what the object for today is. So this is a patch from Universal Studios in Orlando. It's one for Halloween Horror Nights performers, known as scare actors. This one is for the 25th anniversary of Halloween Horror Nights, commonly known as HHN. For the uninitiated, HHN is one of the largest Halloween events in the world and brings in millions of dollars for Universal. The 2023 season, which wrapped up about a month ago, ran for 42 nights. It's estimated that nightly attendance is 30,000 people, which means that there's over 1.2 million people who went to HHN 32. And remember, since HHN is a special event, that's an attendance number beyond the guests who visited Universal Studios during the day. This patch was given to the performers in 2015. That year, HHN ran for 30 nights. As you can see in this graph, there's been a steady increase in the number of nights since the event began in 1991. By the way, the first year it was called Fright Nights. It was renamed Halloween Horror Nights in year 2. As you can probably guess, HHN is by far Universal's biggest production. Each of the houses are built from scratch, and while in the early years some house themes were recycled from year to year, these days every year sees newly themed houses and streets. While Universal employs about 28,000 for regular operations of its parks and hotels, HHN requires 2,000 additional ones, not counting the crews who built the houses. Of that, some 1,300 are scare actors. Being a scare actor is typically an intense and demanding job, so Universal operates 2 casts in each house, 45 minutes on set and 45 minutes off. The houses can have 25 or more roles, while the streets will have as many more, depending on the size of the scare zone. When it comes to Universal staff, scare actors are a special breed. Each of them goes through an audition process, whether they're HHN veterans or not. Many of them are already Universal staff doing other jobs. They have to get approval to temporarily leave their job to do HHN work. There's also many people who only work as a scare actor and have a non-Universal job. What all this means is that scare actors are dedicated to their roles and are doing it because they love the experience. Scare actors come in all shapes and sizes and are aged from 18 up to the hardy souls in their 60s and older. The thing that connects them all is wanting to give a good show by scaring the crap out of people. While HHN is a remarkable event for many reasons, the energy and dedication that scare actors bring to their roles guarantees that guests will have a highly intense experience. Let's see what the object for today is. This is a bottle of beach sand that I collected a few years ago. It's from a beach north of Jacksonville within Big Talbot Island State Park, one of the few undeveloped parts of Florida's east coast. Named Boneyard Beach, it's not all that well known, even though A1A passes right by. It's at the mouth of the Nassau River, so it's somewhat protected by the northern side of the river's outflow. Because of this, I haven't seen much wave action there, and it doesn't feel like the typical Atlantic coast beach. The sand is comprised of beach sand and soil brought there from the river, resulting in a darker color. The most noticeable aspect of Boneyard Beach are the over 100 fallen trees along the 1.5 mile long beach. Because the trees are long dead, they've mostly lost their bark, and the exposed limbs have been bleached white by the action of sun, salt water, and hundreds of storms. The beach is doubly protected, since it's within both Big Talbot State Park and the Timucuan Ecological and Historical Preserve that's managed by the National Park Service. Big Talbot is one of the barrier islands in the area, and due to its location at the mouth of the Nassau River, it's had an unusual erosion pattern over the past several hundred years. As the waters move around the barrier island, the surrounding channels deepen, fill in, and shift. This has meant an erosion of the shoreline impacting the 20-foot-high bluffs, resulting in the collapse of the established tree line. The fallen trees create what is the most dramatic beach scene in Florida. With their long trunks, limbs akimbo, and massive root structures resting perpendicular to the sand. The beach is named for these remarkable bleached, bone-like tree skeletons. Some have been washed out into the water, many are on the beach, and a few are still connected to the bluff. Those that are regularly in the water are covered with life, including snails and barnacles. While they no longer stand, these trees continue to play an important role. By disrupting wind and wave energy, they protect the trees that remain standing as well as the dunes, which slows further erosion. This helps Big Talbot Island play its role in absorbing in much of the power of hurricanes, thereby protecting the natural habitat further inland. By the way, state archaeologists have also found fossilized mammoth bones on Big Talbot, making the name Boneyard Beach just a bit more accurate. Let's see what the object for today is. We've got a pair of keychains that are miniature Tupperware containers. One is a heart-shaped box and the other is a tiny version of Tupperware's Forget-Me-Not Onion Keeper. So at first sight, yet another slightly odd item when it comes to Florida's tourism history. But as I briefly covered in the Orlando Before Disney video, Tupperware moved its headquarters to Kissimmee in 1954, making 2024 its 70th anniversary year. Located on Orange Blossom Trail, just south of the Orange-Osceola County line, it's a fair-sized complex of offices and training facilities that for many years also included their Museum of Dishes and the Magic Kitchen. One of the highlights was the Evolution of Dishes mural. This painting was made up of 10 panels with an overall measurement of 10 by 40 feet. Tupperware was a regular tourist stop on the Orange Blossom Trail along with its neighbor Gatorland. Today there's still a small museum known as the Confidence Center, but most of the visitors are Tupperware staff from around the world who visit the headquarters for training and meetings. There's a small shop that sells current Tupperware products, including some of these tiny treasures that are shown in the museum part along with some classic and modern products. The Confidence Center is generally open to the public and I encourage you to visit. On the Confidence Center entrance sign you can see a graphic. That's part of the logo of Tupperware brands. Oftentimes corporate logos don't have much of a story. For instance, the Nike swoosh was inspired by the wings of the Greek goddess Nike. The Tupperware logo is different. To find its inspiration, one needs only head out the front door of the headquarters and walk 50 feet. This fountain sits in the middle of the entrance square. Known as the Friendship Fountain, it was installed in 1970, presented by Tupperware Australia. The nearby marker says that it symbolizes the worldwide Tupperware spirit of cooperation. a fellowship of business sharing the waters of opportunity from the fountain of free enterprise. The fountain has a diameter of 12.5 feet and consists of 211 radially arranged stalks fitted to a hollow metal globe, itself placed on top of a column. The water is pumped at a rate of 500 gallons per minute, and it emerges from the nozzles as an 18-inch disc of water. The discs merge and create the impression of a dandelion. It was designed by Robert Woodward and Phil Taranto, but it wasn't created for Tupperware. You see, this fountain is actually a replica. The original is in Sydney, Australia, which explains why it was presented by Tupperware Aussies. That fountain was installed in 1961 and is known as the El Alamein Memorial Fountain and is a war memorial dedicated to the Australian Army's 9th Division, which fought in the 2 World War battles of El Alamein, Egypt. Today the fountain is known as the Galen Olsen Friendship Fountain. Olsen was initially a Tupperware independent distributor in 1964. He became an employee in 1981. He worked at the headquarters in several roles, including President of U.S. Sales, President of Latin America, and President of Asia Pacific. He retired in 2004. So yes, a corporate logo with a great story. Let's see what the object for today is. This is a model of Bok Tower. It appears to be brass-plated, and it's pretty old, but I don't know just how old. I haven't seen another one in person, and it's not dated. The only one I've heard of says Lake Wales, Florida, Singing Tower, and made in Japan. This implies it was made in the late 1940s at the earliest. Since this one has Mountain Lake, Florida, and Singing Tower, it's possible it dates before World War II. Known today as Bok Tower Gardens, the attraction opened in 1929, making it one of the oldest Florida attractions still operating. Initially known as Mountain Lake Sanctuary, it was built upon Iron Mountain. At 295 feet, it's one of the highest points along the Lake Wales Ridge, Florida's line of ancient islands that were the only visible part of Florida 2 million years ago. A National Historic Landmark, Bok Tower Gardens is a 250-acre botanical garden, bird sanctuary, and contains Bok Tower, a 205-foot Art Deco and Gothic Revival Carillon tower. It was created by Edward Bok, the editor of Ladies' Home Journal, the first magazine to reach 1 million subscribers, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, as well as a promoter of affordable housing by providing complete plans of houses to the public for as little as $1. Bok's sanctuary near Lake Wales was likely the first large Florida project to utilize a group of nationally recognized architects and artists. This included the garden's designer, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., one of America's foremost landscape architects and city planners. His other works include the grounds of Washington, D.C.'s National Mall, Jefferson Memorial, and White House, as well as national parks including Yosemite, California, Maine's Acadia, and the Everglades. Born in 1870, he was particularly known for his wildlife conservation efforts. Known as the Singing Tower, the focal point of the gardens was designed by Milton Mettery. He was born in 1874 and was an architect in Philadelphia who designed the Washington Memorial Chapel at Valley Forge National Historical Park and Philadelphia's Fidelity Mutual Life Insurance Building. He was also a design consultant for the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Association and George Washington's home, Mount Vernon. Built on the highest point of the property, the tower replaced a water tower, and interestingly, the new tower includes large water cisterns as well as the 60-bell carillon, library, and archive. Its numerous stone sculptures were designed by Lee Lowry, an architectural sculptor born in 1877. His work includes sculptural elements at the Chapel of West Point and the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, the frieze on the Nebraska State Capitol, the Library of Congress's John Adams Building's bronze doors, and the sculpture of George Washington at the National Cathedral. His most famous works are at New York's Rockefeller Center, Atlas, and Wisdom. Lowry's work on Bok Tower includes intricate window grills, marching pelicans, and the heron and eagle sentinels. He also designed the sundial along with Metairie. Master blacksmith Samuel Yellen was born in Ukraine in 1884. He immigrated to the U.S. and settled in Philadelphia. His work can still be seen in many buildings around the U.S., including at Bryn Mawr College, Harvard, Princeton, and Yale Universities, Art Institute of Chicago, Pittsburgh Stephen Foster Memorial, Washington National Cathedral, and Washington Memorial Chapel in Valley Forge. At Bok Tower, he designed and built the interior staircase, gates to the bridges over the moat that surrounds the tower, the sundial's snake, and the magnificent brass door featuring 30 scenes from the Book of Genesis. Obviously, Bok Tower Gardens deserves a much deeper look considering its 94 years of operation and its significance to Florida's tourism history. The tower is one of the most exquisite and extraordinary buildings in Florida and should be on everyone's list of places to visit. Let's see what the object for today is. I think I saved the best for last. This is a small bud vase from Merritt Island pottery. While it's stoneware, it's still delicate. It's a wonderful example of the artist's life work. Made by Melvin Casper, the co-founder and owner of Merritt Island Pottery, this vase is typical of some of his work. It has a glossy dark brown glaze that doesn't quite fully cover the surface. That's not uncommon in pieces made by Mel. I have several of his creations, which I'll show here. I bought them all at Merritt Island Pottery in the 80s and 90s. I was lucky enough to have a few conversations with Mel over the years. He let me take a few photos, but sadly they were done on an early digital camera and aren't the best quality. Mel was born in 1916 in Chicago, Illinois. He studied drawing, painting, and ceramics at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. After graduation, he and his stepmother, Peg Jameson, who was an artist as well, headed to Florida to live with his uncle, an ornithologist. At the time, Merritt Island, which by the way is actually a peninsula, was nearly uninhabited and as much a jungle as any place in Florida. Mel would say there were lots of birds here, thousands of mosquitoes, and only 9 people. They built a small house from pine trees in a 25-acre orange grove. Mel started out to be a commercial artist, but it was obvious that wouldn't work in the wilds of Florida. So in 1937, he and Peg opened Merritt Island Pottery. Mel insisted that they were the first potters in Florida. Pottery is a practical art, one that locals needed for the kitchen and dining room, but working with clay wasn't easy on Merritt Island. First of all, they didn't have electricity for a number of years, and they fired their pottery in kerosene-heated kilns. Locals would arrive in boats to buy their results since there was barely a road that people could use. During World War II, Mel enlisted in the Army and was sent to India and China, serving under General Joseph Stilwell, the controversial chief of staff to Chiang Kai-shek, the eventual leader of the Republic of China. By the way, Stilwell was born in Palatka. It was in Asia that Casper gained artistic inspiration that later would be reflected in his work, such as the simple forms, glaze types, and Chinese characters with which he decorates some of his work. The pottery was particularly known for these glazes. He said that many of them were a mixture of up to 10 elements to create the looks he wanted. He experimented all the time and he kept his recipes a secret. He'd say that he gained most of his expertise through decades of trial and error. For many years, due to their success, Mel and Peg would spend weeks each year traveling around Europe until Peg's death in 1981. Not bad considering that the bulk of their pottery sold for only a few dollars apiece. Ask any successful potter and they'll probably admit that making the same plates, bowls, and mugs can be tedious, since everything needs to be identical in size and shape. When asked about this, Mel would answer, "If I can go to Europe for 6 weeks every year, I can also make a lot of mugs." So as you can see from what I have, he made a number of other pieces. Other things he made were coasters, including Christmas ones, wind chimes, and ornaments. Mel also created some remarkable sculptures, some of which you can see here. He didn't say much to me about these female torsos, but I got the feeling that sculpting figures like this was a good anecdote for the repetitive nature of most of his work. They were hand sculpted, not turned on a pottery wheel. Beyond chatting with Mel and seeing his life's work, one of the times I visited, I was able to buy one of the female torsos. This is it here. When I asked if I could buy it, Mel seemed as if he was reluctant to part with it, though it was probably because he was emotionally attached to the sculptures. The torso has some texture, like a lot of Mel's work, and it has a bit of rough, unfinished look to it. Under bright light, it has a mottled surface with a color similar to finished mahogany wood. It's 15 inches tall and is rather heavy, even though it's hollow. It's signed but undated. I bought it in 1991, and I'm still thrilled to have given it a home. Mel died in 2002 at 86 years old. For 65 years, he lived in Merritt Island and operated a successful pottery business that sold to customers all over the world and was a place that locals and visitors alike could visit and see some of the best ceramics made in Florida. Thanks for watching. Sadly, this is the final episode of Florida's Adventure Series 2023. I'm happy I got to share some of the items in the archive that wouldn't normally appear in a video and tell you some interesting aspects to what they represent.